A volatile war attack descends upon Grecia, an alien planet, and as a result of this, its princess is crushed under stone, triggering a set of events by which her soul must be retrieved from a quantum dimension referred to as the zone or the interval. The people of Grecia and Earth slowly gain access to the zone via an intricate technology, successfully tearing open a passageway into a once forbidden garden, the afterlife. Today, we depart into the world of Fantastic Children and Tree of Palm, two of, in my opinion, Takashi Nakamura's most philosophical and contemplative works. Both Fantastic Children and Tree of Palm have a degree of parallel with themes of reincarnation and the eternal soul, as well as redemption and tragedy. And so I bring this video to you with great excitement, as this was a series I watched in my childhood and a work I have since been unable to forget. In my childhood, I stumbled upon many obscure animated series that I would play on my block of giant silver Panasonic television. I look back into my human memory card and see myself sitting in front of this giant TV watching all of these works. Most of these I remember, but among the list, FC stands out as a show that leaves a strong impression on me even now. So anyway, one day I was given this exact DVD, and this is another one of those series that has an awkward and misleading title, and I think it was found in the movie section of Big Lots of all places. And guys, seriously, I did not know what to expect. I think I was actually expecting this to be about elves, just based on the cover alone, but that would prove to be far from true. It still bewilders me in a lot of ways, and I think above anything, these two works are about spirituality. The creator and director of this show, Nakamura's role in both Tree of Palm and Fantastic Children is significant because there is, as I mentioned, some parallel across his work. I like to think that the plots to his stories become easier to follow if you've seen his older works. This is strongly the case with Fantastic Children since it came some years after his other work called Tree of Palm. He is also known for directing some of the animation behind Akira, Robot Carnival, and he even had a major role in the animation of Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. These all give you a sense of his style, and I for one did not know that he worked on Akira. But looking back, it makes so much sense, and one might even say that Akira is another work demonstrative of spirituality. Not only this, but certain glimpses of the stylistic wonder of Akira and Robot Carnival are faintly seen again in the works I'm discussing currently. His concepts are so distinctive to me because they gravitate towards spirituality and sci-fi together in a way I have just not experienced before. So, let's brush over the plot. This series revolves around three major protagonists, Helga, Toma, and a third slightly more off-screen character, Soron, who we see manifest in this show as a group seemingly unrelated to the greater plot. Of course, there is a much larger narrative to the story, and we're also introduced to the planet in question, Grecia, which is described in this show as a shining blue planet abundant in water. The show even mentions Grecia's exact location in outer space. This is one of my absolute favorite details to this show because of the thought placed on such a specific and scientific detail by the writers. It's almost like an invitation for the viewer to envision or wonder if there perhaps truly is a Grecia lying up in space among the stars of Taurus and the Pleiades. The viewer is mystified by the recurring image of landscapes from Grecia, yet it seems so distant from the character's grasp. Distant in light years, and perhaps distant in a psychic way. This is part of FC's wistfulness and spiritual engagement. The topic of reincarnation also becomes firmly established just as we begin to piece together FC's mysteries in relation to Grecia, as well as the scientific research of the Bayfort children. Personally, I feel that Fantastic Children as a series truly becomes alive after episode 13, where much of the story is arranged and stringed together with an explanation. The thing that sets FC apart is that we're introduced to the ephemeral nature of its characters. The viewer is introduced to Grisia, and through this, Soran and Ses through indirect perspectives in the beginning. And it's almost like Grisia is a myth, not real, or in some kind of intangible dimension, on the brink of fading away permanently. Grecian characters specifically are the most ephemeral of all, and this includes the Bayfort children. This maximizes a fading feeling of familiarity towards Grisia as a whole. So how does reincarnation integrate into this scenario? Well, the viewer learns that Helga is one of many reincarnations, haunted by the image of the Grecian water tower. She feels that this is a real place, and so do all of her previous reincarnations, yet they're all met with the reality that the tower simply does not exist anywhere on Earth. With what eventually happens on Grisia, the viewer learns that scientists on that planet have harnessed an ability to extract and redirect or reroute the soul entirely, even giving it an alleyway to travel across the cosmos. Of course, this is a huge technological advancement, and some of the Grecian scientists grow increasingly hesitant to continue working on this out of fear of defying nature. We will return to this idea of defying nature shortly. In other words, the viewer is given data over the soul being eternal, having its own indestructible code sequence or pattern that does not change even if the vessel reincarnates 1,000 times. There is, however, an original body in this show, which is that of the Grecian bodies. This is, in my opinion, such a poetic touch to the show. I really don't know why, but I was always so moved by this aspect. Something similar is experienced in Tree of Palme, where we get one of its more striking characters, Koram, who returns from death through a conduit to communicate with the people important to her. She returns the first time in a distorted form, still bearing the pain of her father's cold abandonment. It's almost like the unrest of knowing she could never make her father happy reanimates her body after death for a couple seconds. A couple terrifying seconds because of that remnant energy. There is this intense sense of loss in both FC and Tree of Palme that is done so well, because as you watch some of these characters hopelessly attempt to reject their realities, you feel a terrible sense of impending doom and tragedy. You can't help but feel sad. Ses experiences this times 10 in my opinion, so there's a parallel here with these two characters. Okay, so now that I have introduced some of the characters, I want to talk about the conflict between Ses and Soran, which is a major element to the series and possibly the moment of highest tension to this show. Visually, the viewer can make sense of a lot of the Greek influence in the architecture and clothing design of Grisia and its people. Grisia could be described as a high classical palatial structure covered in bleached white sands and buildings, but I would suggest that there's also an ancient Egyptian influence to this show that is detected among these two characters. This is also part of what I find sort of spectacular about FC. It draws from a lot of ancient cultures and figures of spirituality. The viewer only meets Soran until much later into the story, even though he plays a significant role within Tina's psyche. He takes up a lot of space in her mind, yet is only present for very small snippets of the show. And as I began to look into the characters' names, I made a discovery towards what these two characters could potentially represent. I should say I made assumptions since this is my observation, but here is what I found. Ses/Seth in particular shares his name with Set or Seth, the ancient Egyptian deity, who actually suffers a similar fate of, spoiler, being overcome by jealousy and turning to violence. It's clear that the drama of FC is quite immersive and tragic, especially when it comes to the conflict between these two. Ses is briefly villainized, but the viewer understands that this is because there is, in his words, no room for him in Tina's heart, and he is devastated by this. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Set ends the life of Osiris after finding out that his wife was unfaithful with Osiris, and it's written that Set and Osiris are like brothers, very similar to how Ses and Soran are like brothers in this show. What's interesting too is that we see this exact same dynamic with Tina's mother and father, and with Jorka, so it leaves me to wonder if perhaps in this universe there is a connection even further back into quotations history with Set, Osiris, and Isis. This is just a thought in theory. In continuation of what I mentioned, Ses gets his wounds salted and mocked by Jorka as he sneers, "You let a common soldier steal your princess away." The viewer is given several glimpses into the perceived cruelty of unrequited feelings. While it's understood that Tina is not necessarily cruel, she is more so indifferent to Ses, and some might even say that this is worse than being cruel, but he likely feels that she is cruel after his sacrifice and devotion to her. This may be an explanation as to why he ends up going crazy, despite previously accepting Tina and Soren's union. Jorka is another example of this, as he desires Titus's throne, and is responsible essentially for the war in Grecia. After Jorka, there is Duma, Tina's half-brother, who wants to reconnect with her, but does not get the opportunity to do so. So we have another character aside from Ses, who essentially gets tossed aside. Another huge example are the Grecian scientists, who desire to go beyond what is known to them. Their desire leads them to peer into a place beyond death, but this doesn't necessarily produce an entirely positive outcome. In Tree of Palm, a similar parallel is given with Koram and her father, who, like Tina, is utterly indifferent towards her. This, too, is a spiritual element to the show because desire is central to spirituality, and it's often the sole driving force behind favorable and unfavorable outcomes. Desire actually presents itself as both a downfall and a triumph in this show. So one other detail to both works is the amount of shared spiritual elements. So firstly, we have Enma and Bolas. In this universe, Enmas are shadowy entities that pursue the Bayfort group because they are in defiance of natural law, meaning they don't die and continue to artificially reincarnate because they have a mission to find a specific person. They target the instability of the soul. It's explained in the show that they have the power to destroy a soul if it is out of balance or if an organism refuses to accept death. I also did some research on the side and I looked up the word Enma, and evidently the word means personification of death, a quite direct answer to their mystery in the show. Similarly, the Bolas creature from Tree of Palm rises to carry the dead. They have the physical appearance of maggots in the Tree of Palm, which I find cool as they, like the Enma, emerge to enact natural law. Both of them can be perceived as expressions of spirituality because their presence signifies the end of life. There are some epic and haunting scenes in Tree of Palm that show the Bolas dragging people away as they are still alive but on the brink of death. Next, we have the Lilia flower, a mysterious blue flower that Shion is surrounded by, one that returns as the flower Miss Christina has in mind when dyeing fabric. It was cool to see this cameo of this flower, as it was another thing I remembered from way back, and something I picked up on when I had watched Tree of Palm. I find this flower to be sort of like an expression of sadness or longing since it manifests during the solemn scenes of both works. It has a particularly doomful or dangerous air in FC, as it grows in a dangerously high area in the mountains. Lastly, we have Orsal. Orsal is the life force present in everything. It can become potentially dangerous if levels increase or if there's a general imbalance. High concentrations of Orsal can be deadly, and this is observed in the show during one of the most tense scenes. I find these elements to be spiritual because they often allude to something metaphysical. There are many spiritual teachings that talk about, for example, an energetic force that exists in everything and that is similar to what Orsal is defined as in this show. The Enma and the Bolas are possibly the most symbolic figures of all because they have a specific function. So in this way, these elements are all spiritual. And so that brings me to my final thoughts. I wanted to mention that I feel like FC does something clever, which is to not have much going on visually during the explanatory scenes. Usually there's very little movement and animation, so it kind of forces you to maintain a longer attention span, or else you risk not understanding what is happening. But this also makes emotional scenes all that much more intense. I remember how entranced I was watching this for the first time, and I still find the reveal of the original Titanic-sized Grecian bodies to be so original. There is actually a lot of atmospheric power to FC that makes it unforgettable for me. And with this said, that brings me to the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.